Hello and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. My name is Pushpendra Mehta, and my guest for today is Craig Jeffery, Managing Partner at Strategic Treasurer. Welcome back to the Open Treasury podcast, Craig.
Thank you, Push.
For the benefit of our CTMfile audience, we will begin our conversation by discussing the 12th topic and the 13th article in a series on leading practices in corporate treasury published on CTMfile. This article is about messaging networks. Craig, corporate treasury teams communicate with banks through host-to-host connections, consolidators and service bureaus, and financial messaging networks like the Global Interbanking Network SWIFT and regional or country networks like IBIX, Zengin, and many others for payments messaging, bank reporting, bank fee analysis, and to collect data for cash positions. Networks are an essential requirement for corporate treasurers to achieve visibility and resiliency of their financial processes and information. Selecting messaging networks that are resilient, reliable, and secure is important. Craig, why is this so? And can you talk us through these three key aspects?
Yeah, Push. When we think about communication, financial messaging, whether it's information, it's transactions, it's confirmation related to trade, cash, et cetera, there's value in a good communication network. Just like on your phone, whoever your phone carrier is, you want that to provide good service, let's say good cellular service, solid uptime, good customer care. It's the same, but probably more important for your financial messages and your financial transactions. So, resilient means it's able to recover. It has multiple points so that it would be hard to break down. And that ties into the reliability. You want uptime, not 98% of the time, not 99, but 99.9 or 99.99 or some very large level. You're going through another network. You're going through another point that needs to be up almost all the time to surpass the host-to-host type connections that exist from a consistency standpoint. So reliability is vital. Secure, we're sending financial messages. It needs to be top level secure, just like any financial messages needs to be that way. But particularly when you're sending through networks, and most networks, most payment networks, most financial messaging networks have that as probably their top priority and maintain that. And so those are things to consider and to make sure they're staying up with it. There's a few other elements about messaging networks that matter. Some elements about, non-repudiation may make sense to make sure you sent a message, you have confirmation that the other received it. If you send something directly, you want to get a confirmation that they've received it into their technology system, their communication hub. You may want confirmation that the file was processed fine in their, ultimate messaging system and beyond. So there's a few more things than the three that you highlighted, but those three are really, really crucial.
Those three are really crucial. Another question that I had in my mind comes from the Strategic Treasurer's Treasury Technology Analyst Report 2021, wherein this thought-provoking and powerful statement caught my attention that a network's value is built on two primary foundations, reach and functionality. Can you please elaborate on these two primary foundations as value enhancers? And according to you, which is the right cross-border messaging network choice for corporations? Is it IBIX or SWIFT?
Well, the second one, I'm going to pass on that because I think when you're looking at any of the networks or when you look at aggregators or data consolidators or payment hubs, there's quite a few elements there. And a number of companies use multiple payment hubs, like they may use IBIX and SWIFT, depending on their reach and depending on particular needs. That's a fairly involved answer. I think it probably makes more sense for me to spend a little bit more time on that first part. A really good question about the two primary foundations. I think you use the term reach and functionality. Other terms might be size and capabilities. So what's the value of connecting to a network? Who can you talk to? And what can you say? What can you communicate? You think about Alexander Graham Bell sets up a phone system. What's the value of the network? Well, he talked to someone across the hall or whatever. It's like, are you there? Can you come or whatever? And there wasn't much value in the message, and there was only one person he could talk to, but that was the start of something bigger. And then the phone system developed and multiple people could be connected, used with manual switches, plugging cables, cords in to make those connections. And then it expanded, cross-border, global, with massive amounts of switching. And so the network has become billions of people and business numbers across the globe. And so size matters. The more you can reach matters. Just like access via the World Wide Web. We don't think about it, but almost everyone in the world has access to the World Wide Web. So you can serve information up, so you can get to people, whether it's via email or a website. So that's an element of size. And so the same thing is true with some of these networks. So if you say Swift is like, okay, there's over 11,000 banks on the Swift network, and they have a lot of these are really big banks that have correspondent relationships that you reach even more banks than that significantly. And so when you connect to this network, now your reach, if you're a bank, is massive. If you're a corporate, your reach is, a subset of those that may participate in the score model, or there's some other ways to get to more of those banks. That's a really interesting concept, is now I can get to all or most of my banks through one particular network. But the size, the scale of the network, the reach of the network matters for purposes like I don't want to have, if I have to talk to 30 banks, I don't want to have 30 phones. That does not make sense. You would laugh if someone did that. If I have to talk to 30 people and maybe I needed a couple phones, you could understand that. But the one phone or a couple phones versus 30, you can see why there would be value in not having, let's say, maybe it makes sense to have Ebix, Swift, Zengen. If I have a connection, what can I do? And I always think of the example of, you have a phone. Oh, I have a phone. I can talk to people. I can text. Now I have two ways of communicating. There used to be a camera. When they put a camera on the phone, they were terrible. And I remember we would carry a separate camera for stuff we did. Well, eventually the quality resolution grew. We don't carry those small cameras around because the tech has made it redundant. And so now you've got, I can talk, I can text, I can video, I can take pictures and movies. Well, now I also have access to applications. I can do my banking. I can order car service to get different places. So the more I can do on it, the more effective, the more beneficial that network is. So this ability, the capabilities that exist, or the functionality that exists in the network matter. So for example, if you're talking about Swift, is like I can get my information, balances, transactions. I can get trade requests. I can transact. I can send funds movement requests to any, really through them to any payment system in the world. I can get confirmations, acknowledgments, negative acknowledgments. Now I have a robust set of business messages that can exist back and forth. And so the more I can do there, the more value there is to it. So those are the two powers of networks, two main powers, size and capability, or reach and functionality, however you want to refer to those.
So size and scale matter. So Craig, when it comes to selecting messaging networks, besides size and scale, why is the level of uptime and the ability to recover considered important for corporate treasury?
Yeah, I don't know that many consider that as important as they should. And, the issue of uptime, hey, I want the network up. That's a pretty important item. So if you look at, Swift, I think they talk about 5 nines, 99.999% uptime. They've got failover and capabilities, really, really robust, right? I don't know what that translates to a year, but it's not much time, probably a little bit more than you can hold your breath, but certainly it's not down very much. I think that's important from a general perspective because, when you think about host-to-host connectivity, those things seem to be very stable, and then there's a problem, there's a reset. It's, there's all kinds of issues that come up that have to be touched from time to time. It's not down. If it was down 20% of the time, nobody would consider it reliable, just like airplane safety. When you think about why is uptime and the ability to recover important, I think of a couple things. If I'm communicating to one bank host to host, maybe fine. I have multiple hours to get transactions settled. It's okay if there's a delay in information. There's a slight cost to it, but I may not need it as immediately as other organizations. And so for them, I'm connecting to one bank host to host is great. The more I'm connecting and the more speed matters and reliability matters, we need to think about that more. And there is a difference. If you're connecting to Swift, let's think about it this way: is how are banks communicating with each other? They're communicating either directly or over Swift heavily. So they're sending their core messages. They have communication hubs where they're communicating with their clients. Where is most of their traffic, most of the value moving across in terms of messaging and activity for the bank? It's through the Swift network, for example. It's massive. Which one are they going to get up first? I know it's one or the other. They're going to try to get both up first, but which one has the greatest amount of redundancy, attention, ability to recover is going to be the Swift network. There's problems with communication hubs. Banks usually have multiple communication hubs as people are sending things in through SFTP, other methods through the portal, uploading files. Which one are they going to get up first? They're going to get Swift up first. They're going to put all their resources to doing that. Even though they're different areas, that's going to be their most reliable networking connection. Why does that matter? Well, if there's a problem somewhere along the lines of them sending you information, and it's quite reliable, but they're sending you information for your balances, your prior day balances, and there's some problem along the way, they work to recover it. They may get it up, but let's say an issue happens. It takes an hour to get something resolved, restored, figure out the issue, an hour or two. That would be unheard of in communications that banks have with a Swift network. So unless it's at the originating system that they can't get data out of it, that information is going to flow in a more resilient fashion. And Swift has, they receive information, can deliver it. So if there's a problem or an interruption at any point, you're still going to be able to get to Swift. As an example, I know this really wasn't about Swift, but I'm just using that as an example here. We want things to go quickly. We want things to go well. This idea of a resilient process matters. And sometimes we don't factor that in. A lot of, corporate treasury people don't factor that in and say, how often am I going to need this? Not very often does it come into play. But when it does, that matters. And, we want a more resilient process. It may be not the same as your personal safety. If you're flying airlines, you want them to always be flying well. But certainly one of the factors needs to be how resilient is your method of connecting for financial messaging.
You mentioned a very important word, interruption. And my last question for today's discussion possibly connects to that, which is that how can treasurers leverage financial messaging networks to serve as conduits for communication?
So, the whole connectivity model that treasurers use needs to be thought out and needs to be current and should be reviewed. It's one thing to say, I need information from banks. I need to move money, with banks. I have other messages and transactions that need to be managed. That's always the case. But how do I architect the different components of the systems that I use, whether it's various banking systems, an ERP, a reconciliation platform, various admin systems like AP, or if you're a financial company, you may have a number of claim systems or revenue related systems that you're tracking to. They need information. They need to communicate. They need to confirm. So whether it's an FX trade or it's you're sending transfers, you're getting information, this idea of how do I set up my infrastructure to handle that properly is, for many organizations, that's vital. For every organization, it has it's at least important or it can be very vital, depending on the size, intensity around payments, information, and the requirements for speed. So that has to be, reflected in the design. And since tech has changed dramatically, messaging and handoffs to networks and platforms, new tech, the use of APIs, SFTP, connections into networks, those really need to be considered in light of new tech and expectations. There's new payment rails. There's expectations about speed. There's requirements for compliance, the ability to respond quickly to issues and potential threats. Those are all core foundational requirements for Treasury. Who should be the superintendent of payments? Who owns cash, needs to see it, has to protect the most liquid asset. So all of those factor into getting to the good question you asked about how can they do it. They have to think about that as important, design the structure, and then implement it.
Craig, those were terrific recommendations. Thank you as ever for your incisive analysis. These, I hope, will be of tremendous benefit to our CTMfile audience, whom I would like to thank as well for joining us on this edition of Open Treasury. Please subscribe and look in the show notes for the article links. Thank you. This podcast is provided for information purposes only, and statements made by CTMfile or guests on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, or consulting advice. For more information, visit ctmfile.com.